Okay, welcome to the fifth part of chapter 22. Now we're going to be looking, as we continue our exploration of speciation. We know that natural selection and the fitness of the individual drive changes within a population. Remember that the individuals are tested, and their relative fitness, is the amount of contribution that they have to the gene pool of their offspring's offspring, correct? So there's two ways that speciation can occur depending on how the gene flow between the members of a population is interrupted. We've just looked in the fourth video at how important isolation is to speciation. Well, now we're going to be looking at how the isolation can occur. So allopatric speciation is isolation due to a physical geographical separation, right? Now think about this as an example of like a mountain range that develops over time, that may split a population. The physical barrier separates them, right? So this is known as allopatric speciation. Sympatric speciation is isolation that occurs without some sort of physical geographical separation. But I want to caution you that you need to remember that for speciation to occur, isolation must become reproductive isolation for a speciation event. Now, we can look at some allopatric speciation examples of these as geographical barriers, so a large body of water for some organisms, or a small body of water for some smaller organisms such as these beetles. Isolation mechanisms by allopatric means or separating by geography kind of depend on the organism. If you think about birds, they can move long distances over the air, whereas some of these ground beetles may not be able to traverse even a fairly narrow stream. Other times, these differences in habitats can prevent mountainous organisms from being able to expand into a neighboring mountain because they can't pass through the habitat in between. So allopatric speciation is some sort of speciation based upon a geographical barrier. While sympatric speciation may be more difficult to picture in your mind because the process of reproductive isolation doesn't coincide with the separation of a population by some sort of visible barrier. So think of this as maybe the development of a behavior that might separate two species, correct? It's maybe not as easy to visualized in an animal, but maybe in plants, because in plants we see something known as polyploidy, a mutation that occurs in that changes the number of chromosomes. Many times polyploid plants become new species because once polyploidy is seen, those polyploid individuals only begin to reproduce with other polyploid individuals, and that all can occur within the same geographic area. So that's an example of sympatric speciation. Adaptive radiation explores how the evolution of several divergent forms may occur from a primitive and an unspecialized ancestor. We see something called adaptive radiation many times where a new habitat forms. New habitats, think of those as sort of like islands. And we remember the importance of islands in studying evolutionary biology with both Wallace and Darwin. So in adaptive radiation, you have a very primitive, unspecialized ancestor that suddenly finds itself in a brand new environment with a host of new environmental challenges. Well, many times this can lead to rapid speciation, and this is sometimes called adaptive radiation. Here's a figure from your book kind of illustrating what I was just talking about. A primitive species flies from the mainland to an island, and as the species moves to different island, new challenges are visualized here, and so different species tend to evolve based upon the separation of these things. Now, Darwin and his cohort of scientists all promoted something called gradualism, which is sort of this slow change of species from a primitive ancestor to modern forms, slowly changing over time. While there is some evidence that a concept called punctuated equilibrium also may explain this, and punctuated equilibrium is where we have long periods of stability followed by rapid bursts of quick evolutionary change. There are probably truths found in both of these examples of the pace of evolution. Now, we can't talk about evolution without talking about extinction, because it's extinctions many times that create these voids in habitats and in an environment that allow new species to adaptively radiate into them. There's can be considered to be 5 major mass extinctions in the past. Probably the most notable is the Cretaceous extinction some 65 or so million years ago that brought an end to what we consider dinosaurs, although we now know that dinosaurs didn't in fact go extinct. They simply continued to grow feathers and morphed into modern birds. One of the scary things is that now we are possibly in a new 6th mass extinction right now. And the rate of this extinction may be greater than the rate of the Cretaceous extinction. So here's just an interesting table from your book that talks about the number of recorded extinctions since 1600. When we look at mammals as a group, about 5,000 approximate number of species. Since 1600, some 85 have gone extinct. So that's about 1%, almost 2% of the entire taxon. That's a fairly large group. And I don't feel comfortable talking about extinction without pointing out that many times we may be our own worst enemy. Man can come in and very rapidly change an environment. And this rapid change to the environment can provide to be costly for certain species. Species such as the Atwater's prairie chicken that was once found numbering in the millions in the Texas coastal prairie that we currently call home. However, rapid changes brought upon by colonization and expansion of this area have converted its habitat, tall grassland prairie, into a checkerboard pattern of parking lots, agricultural fields, concrete, etc. And so this has severely limited the Atwater's prairie chicken, and it will probably go extinct within our lifetimes.